Hi everyone, how are you today? My name is Astrid. I'm the accredited practicing dietitian from Clean Health Fitness Institute, and today I'm going to answer quite a few questions about nutritional systems. Right, so I've gotten quite a few. If you are interested in asking any questions, please feel free to ask them. But now, at the moment, I'm going to have and answer quite a few questions I've got already from you guys. So, one of the first things people ask me a lot is, what is a nutritional system in the first place? And the first and the best way to explain what this is to pretty much think about how the minimum or the smallest way you can distribute your macronutrients and your calories in a day. So this is what a nutritional system is. Nutritional system is basically the smallest unit of the nutritional sciences, where we can talk about the way that we distribute and allocate macronutrients, ratios, and in a single day or even in a single meal. So that would be like saying carbohydrates, fats, and protein are going to be allocated in a certain way throughout the day. So meal timing, we're talking about how much protein are you having and how actually you're going to distribute that throughout the day in each meal. That's our nutritional system. So it's pretty much looking at the percentage of how you distribute your macros in a day. Protein, carbohydrate, fats, how much would that be as a percentage throughout the day? So to give you a little bit more of a simple example is 40% would be protein, 40% carbohydrate, 20 to 30% or 20% would be fats. This is sort of a nutritional system. I'm allocating a percentage and a ratio to each macronutrient, and that's going to be the way I'm going to allocate the calories, and then I can decide how I'm going to distribute that throughout the day. Now, what is a microcycle when it comes to look at nutritional systems? So if I already spoke about that nutritional systems are the smallest, or if we look at that as a single day, microcycles are pretty much the way you organize and you allocate these nutritional systems from few days to up to 2 weeks. Then we talk about mesocycles, and these mesocycles, or perhaps we would probably don't even use that much, but we would use macrocycles. So the microcycles are within the macrocycle. So this is the smallest amount of little distribution of nutritional systems together within a few days up to 2 weeks, and then these sort of blocks are put together a few times and you get a macrocycle that can be from few months to a year or more. So it depends on your client's goal, and it also depends on what are you wanting to achieve with the nutritional plan. What is the first thing you need to do when designing a nutritional plan for a client? And this question is very common to hear from a lot of people, and I really want you to tell you that the main thing you need to know is you want to know what your client wants, what's the goal, but then once you're going to design, well, what's the program, what is the plan, we need to allocate and decide how much calories your client is going to need. And in this sense, you need to pretty much determine what the total daily energy expenditure, or the TDEE, is of your client, so you can either reduce calories according to the goal if the client wants to lose weight, or allocate a calorie surplus if the goal is to gain weight. Or perhaps it's just to try to get a client for a while in maintenance, to perhaps work on behaviors, meal selection, meal choices, just pretty much getting to understand their nutrition a little bit better. So it really depends on what your goals, your clients' goals are, and how you want to work with them. It really also depends on what's their environment, what's their lifestyle, and how much time you have to work with them. It's very important for you to understand and let them know that you want to look at a time that is relatively achievable and smart. You want to have enough time to create an impact in your clients. So it is for longer term, and you also want to make sure your client is all the time giving you the feedback of how they feel, so you can pretty much adjust as you go. Now, I get a lot of questions about the ketogenic diet as well. Ketogenic diet is one of the nutritional systems because it is a way that you can distribute or allocate a ratio of your macronutrients. So when we think about ketogenic diet, we are talking about 70 to 80% of that being fat, and the rest being a little bit of protein and very, very minimal amount of carbohydrates. There is I could say like an adjusted version of ketogenic diet where perhaps about 60% is fat, then you have a little bit more of a protein allowance, and then the carbohydrates still very low, but the changes are more around carbohydrates, around fats, and the protein is actually a little bit higher. So that's kind of a modified version of the ketogenic diet. I'm not a fan of it, but it definitely is a tool, and it has its place for certain clients, especially those who perhaps are metabolically not very well placed, and they might benefit from going a little bit lower carbohydrates for a while trying to adjust and improve their metabolic health. You don't necessarily need to go ketogenic diet or very, very low carbohydrate diet. You could use a low carb approach or lower carb approach, and you could still get a lot of benefit out of it. And even if we go to the other extreme, which could be high carbohydrate diet, when we talk about a high carbohydrate diet, we want to think that the amount of carbohydrates obviously will be higher. We're thinking about the same 50 to 60% of your total calorie intake will come from carbohydrates, and the rest will be from protein and very minimal amount of fat. Who benefits from this? Most of the time you'll see that athletes are a good fit for this high carbohydrate diet. Vegans and vegetarians will also benefit from this diet, particularly because there's no very much that they can do with the fat content, but you can make it very high fat if you wanted to as well in a plant-based diet or a vegan diet. So it really comes down to what works for you and how better you can adhere to it long term. I think I answered this question. Who is the best suited client for a high carbohydrate diet? So athletes would be the most adequate for this diet, but again, if you're trying to lose weight or stay in a maintenance calories, if you have a really decent amount of protein in your diet, you can either play around with carbohydrates or fat. It doesn't really matter. It just matters what the most is that you're having an adequate protein intake to keep your lean body mass, especially if you're in a very low calorie diet that is going to allow to preserve muscle mass. Otherwise, if you're in a maintenance calorie diet, you don't really need to go very crazy about the amount of protein, or because you're already having an adequate amount of calories coming from your carbohydrates and fats, so you're not going to put as much at risk your muscle mass as if you were in a deficit. So I then get asked a lot of questions about what does isocaloric diet mean. Isocaloric diet means that it could mean that you're pretty much, it's very straightforward. You can say that is a calorie balanced diet, maintenance calories, but also the distribution is very even. So you might have 30 to 35% of that coming from protein, 40 to 45% to 50% coming from carbohydrates, and the rest coming from fats. It's kind of a very even distribution rather than being very extreme when we look at very low carbohydrates or high fat diets. So we have sort of the extremes, and we have in the middle the isocaloric diet. Are low carbohydrates safe? Most of the times you could say they are, if you have no problems in health problems. If you are a diabetic, you probably can get away from it if you're type 2 diabetic. If you're type 1 diabetic, you probably need some carbohydrates to regulate, especially if you're on the insulin, you taking insulin consistently to maintain your blood sugar levels stable. So do I think low carb diets are safe? Generally for a healthy population it is, but it comes down to adherence and how you feel with that diet. Generally it will be safe if you're prone to have hypos or feel very foggy or confused or very lethargic with a very low carb diet. I wouldn't recommend it. You don't need to go that low. You can also get away from having a more balanced approach. Is carb cycling a good method to keep your clients compliant? And this comes back to the same. So if we look at the amount of carbohydrates, for some people might work really well if you're kind of working in a sort of zigzag. You're having some days that are low carb diet, other days are your high days or higher carbohydrates. This can be very useful for gym pop, or even people that like to have those days that they are having a quite intense training or workouts, and they might benefit from having more carbohydrates those days, and other days maybe just a little bit less. It really is it's another tool that you can use. You don't necessarily need to stress too much about specifically if this is going to be the best approach. It is a tool that can work for many clients and can obviously help your clients be more compliant, because sometimes you might be able to allocate more carbohydrates the days they want to go for a nice party or a meeting with the family, so they have more allowance of carbohydrates. They can use those days, and other days they might not need any as much carbohydrates, or they might not use them as much. And the last question I've got here is, does the Performance Nutrition Coach certification level 1 go through the different type of nutrition systems you can use? And the answer is, of course. This is one part that is covered by the certification, and it is really very, very in detail, so you might benefit from this as well. I don't know if you guys have more questions. I did get another one, which was, is there a specific diet that we can follow in a type 2 as a type 2 diabetic? And I think I did explain a little bit about this. I don't think you need to necessarily focus on a specific sort of macronutrient distribution. I would recommend you to be very on point with your protein intake and focus on having a little bit of a balanced approach, if you will, where you can have a decent amount of carbohydrates in your diet, but perhaps the way you have them is think about quantity, quality, and frequency. We want to see when is best the better time to utilize them, perhaps around your training. If you're doing exercise or resistance training, that's going to be a little bit of a better timing to use your carbohydrates as compared to other times of the day. But if you pretty much focus on managing the quantities and the quality, especially when we think about the glycemic load or how this impacts in your blood sugar levels, you want to have a decent amount of carbohydrates that are not too little but not too much. And this is also going to impact the way you feel and how much exercise or how active you are throughout the day. So if you're not very active, you're very sedentary, you're at home or working for long hours in front of the computer, I wouldn't recommend you to have too much carbohydrates around those times, but more when you are more active. And then those times the times you're not as active, you're going to have a higher protein, a little bit more high fat approach and less carbohydrates, so you can time them in a particular around times where you're going to use them the most. I hope this was useful. Leave the comments down below if you're interested in asking any further questions. My name is Astrid and I will see you next Monday. See you soon.